Hi and welcome to FBU Podcast, the podcast of the Fire Brigades Union, the professional voice of the UK firefighters. We're here today to talk about the very serious issue of firefighter pay, because we've had a pay offer. I'm joined by General Secretary Steve Wright and also Assistant General Secretary Ben Selby to discuss the recommendation that the Executive Council is making in regard to this offer, and also to discuss how we proceed, the next steps, as it were. So Steve, I'll turn to you first. This comes from a meeting of the National Joint Council, took place on the 3rd of June, where the employers set out a pay offer, which was a 3.8% pay increase to all grey book roles in continuous professional development. But let's get the context first. First of all, not all members will be familiar with the National Joint Council. So what is it and how did we get to this stage?
Well, the National Joint Council is the body that we negotiate at on our terms and conditions and pay. Every year we discuss pay and ultimately we put forward our position, and we've been doing that since the NJC meeting in February, Tam. So this pay offer comes at the back end of intense negotiations that myself and Ben have been in since February, and a lot of detailed work has gone into those discussions, those debates, and ultimately got us to the point of a 3.8% offer. But the National Joint Council is where we collectively bargain on behalf of all UK firefighters, Scottish firefighters, Welsh, Northern Ireland, and those that work in English fire and rescue services. And that gives us the opportunity to make the case for firefighters on our terms and conditions, on the issues, on disputes. And that is something that this union has quite rightly fought for. There are many other unions that have pay review bodies that just set the pay for them, that we're in the room negotiating on that. And I think that's an important point to make, that this has been a negotiated position that we've got to. And I suppose for those reasons, the negotiated position that we have found has been why the Executive Council recommends the 3.8%.
No, I think it's very important to make that point, because you said a lot of other industries have, and a lot of areas of the public sector have pay review bodies, basically an independent, so-called independent body that makes a recommendation, which is effectively imposed if the government fund it. We negotiate pay. Now, you talked about these negotiations have been ongoing since around February. So I take it this wasn't the start point. The end result was 3.8%, but there was a big build-up to this, was there?
Well, look, I think for the last year we've been discussing pay. We know it's the number one priority for members for us to deliver on that, and that is something we focus on day in, day out, me, myself and the AGS. So discussions around pay have been taking place alongside the pay reform work, which I'm sure we'll get into. But specifically since February, we've been meeting with the national employers on a weekly basis to discuss what pay looks like this year. And our pay award is July the 1st, so we've been working towards that date. But when you put that into the economic climate that we're working in at the moment, it's been an up and down road. When we first opened up the formal negotiations in February, that was before there was wars in Iran. And so we've been trying to monitor those situations whilst get to a position which is, I think, a fair and credible position, understanding the funding arrangements in each and every fire and rescue service, where members are to get us to that point. But certainly not the starting position was not 3.8%, and that's come through negotiations up until the morning the National Joint Council met last week.
So you're saying the unions pushed it, they've increased the offer effectively because of the union pressure, yeah? Yeah,
well, I suppose our view was to try and slow the negotiations down, because inflation, we didn't know where it was going to land. And you're always negotiating 1 year in advance, so we're looking forward and we don't know what inflation will sit at across the next year, 26 into 27. So you're working within those parameters. But the employers will try and get an offer on the table, I suppose, for us, which reflects the funding arrangements in the fire and rescue services, and that we're fighting for funding and investment in the fire and rescue service. We've seen cuts across many services, and quite rightly our Cut to Kill campaign is pushing back on those. But we do know the economic environment that we're working in. But to be specific around it, Sam, that the negotiators in the room were offered around a 3% offer, which is where the employers were sat. We managed to increase that, and an offer was received of 3.3%, which is in line with what ALGA have offered to Green Book members. But we've managed to negotiate that intensely up until the week before the National Joint Council, up to 3.6%, and then ultimately we got to 3.8% on the morning of the National Joint Council last week.
Okay, Ben, I'll bring you in. Steve referred to you. You're also one of the key negotiators on behalf of the union and National Joint Council. Clearly, there's been movement in this offer, but it's quite a difficult task, this, because there's a widespread acknowledgement, because it's true, that firefighters' pay has gone backwards since 2010. We've also got the inflationary pressures. Added to that, you've got the employers, you've got to have the money to pay it as well. So it's no easy task negotiating pay at the NJC, I'm guessing.
No, certainly not. I think it's important to look back over periods of time, though. You're right to point out since 2010, we've seen a huge decline in firefighter pay. However, more recently, we've seen the sums we were getting, certainly through the 20 teens, if you like, 1%, 2% maximum, have been increased somewhat over the last 4 or 5 years. We have obviously had the 7 and 5 offer, a 4, a 3.2, and now a 3.8 in 2026, which I think actually, as far as today's concerned, that's the largest public sector pay offer or award we've seen across public sector. So 2026 is again looking relatively positive when you look at the rate of inflation. Inflation does matter. It gives us an indication of where our members' cost of living expenses are coming from, Tam, and the issues it's causing members, in terms of their domestic financing. However, it isn't the only factor that we're looking at here. And as Steve's mentioned, I'm sure, as Steve said, we'll get to that. But we have this opportunity we see around pay reform, and that's been part of these discussions. How do we get over the natural bumps in the road in terms of pay awards each year, whilst we still want to head towards this opportunity of seeing our sector be invested in, see it well funded? But how does that then how does that translate into firefighter pay? And that's the question of how all this kind of is interlinked.
So that's been a big part of these talks. Now we'll go into the details of the pay reform as much as we can anyway, quite soon. But that's been one of the key factors within this current set of negotiations, hasn't it?
Yeah, I think so, Steve, hasn't it? I think it's important to recognise that actually, whilst you want to deal with annual pay awards in its own space, separate to pay reform, we also know fundamentally that the strategic direction of this union is to try and seize this opportunity of greater investment, greater clarity about what the firefighter role is, and increase firefighter pay quite fundamentally. We don't want to scupper, if you like, that opportunity by getting the pay award for 2026 wrong. And that's why there's been, I suppose, some pressures on us as negotiators, pressures on the Executive Council in terms of holding us to account, but equally pressures on the national employers to try and get towards that intended collective aim as well.
Yeah. So just on that, Tam, is that we understand that we've all worked through the fire service for over the past couple of decades of where our pay has 1%, 0.5%, 0%, the restraint that we felt through austerity. And no one is saying 3.8% is necessarily going to fix that. But we know it doesn't. No one's going to sit here and say it fixes the years of austerity. We know that. We think there is an opportunity to pay reform work to try and fix some of those 20-year problems that we see in the fire service. But we do feel like we're making progress. If you see inflation sat at 2.8% at the moment, this is a percentage above that. We're no economic experts, but if you look at all the projections, it may rise over the next couple of months, but it should level out. Who knows what's going to happen with the political landscape that we're operating in, but we do feel that the 3.8 at this point in time, and that's all you can do as negotiators at that point in time, and to try and deliver on that. But I think taking firefighters to £40,358 is significant. But we want to build on that, and we think we've got an opportunity to do so.
Okay, no, I think the context is important. I think members should know, will want to know that everything has been considered. Nobody's negotiating in an ivory tower, are they? You're directly connected with members through the structures of the union. You've been taking those arguments forward. So 3.8% offer on all grey book roles and continuous professional development. There's a next line in the circular, Steve. It says, after careful consideration, the Executive Council has voted on balance to recommend that members accept this offer. And we'll discuss how members go about doing that. But you talk about on balance. What was the debate like at the Executive Council? Why do you say on balance?
Well, look, it wasn't just a one-off debate, Tam. This has been debated by the executive at every meeting, as you well know, but more so since February when we entered into, I'd call them more formal negotiations following the National Joint Council meeting in February. So look, they did discuss it. They discussed what that meant to firefighters' pay. And I think the one thing that did come out of the debate and the discussion, certainly from us as negotiators in the room, was that there is no strings attached to this. There is no other element to extra work. There is no strings around our terms and conditions. This is a flat payment of 3.8%, and will go across all grades, all levels, all pay spines of our members right now. So it was around that. It was around, okay, how do you move the employers necessarily? That's what this is about, isn't it? Yeah. We go in one side trying to get the best deal for our members, and the employers are, on this occasion, I think they were trying to get to a fair position to continue the wider work that we'll discuss. But I suppose the question for the executive was, listening to us as the negotiators in the room, that's as far as we think we can take negotiations, and long days, long hours in the room to do that. But how would you then move the employers on the next steps? And look, we've been around long enough, the three of us, to know that would mean a concerted effort around a campaign led by industrial action to move the employers, which could well mean strike action. And so there was lots of discussions around the economic position we find ourselves in at the moment, and how this would play out across all different pay bands. That's a discussion. But I think importantly, the Executive Council are the ones that are in their regions, informing that debate, informing that decision of where we go next. So it wasn't an easy decision by them, but I think they listened to us in the room of where we'd managed to get to, and where we think we can take it next, I suppose.
Yeah, plus the leaders of the union, they should be making recommendations. If I was a member and then my EC put an offer to me, I'd certainly be saying, well, what do you think? So yes, a recommendation is important. Okay then, so it's really important to stress this. That's a recommendation, but members decide this.
Exactly. Yeah.
The members will decide if they accept this offer or not. That's a key principle for us in the FBU, Stephen. Certainly something that you've been speaking a lot about. Members will decide this, yeah?
Oh, 100%. And look, we've got the advantage now, we can run electronic ballots. So we were keen, and certainly the Executive Council was keen to get the money that members are owed in their pockets as close to 1st of July pay award date as possible. So with the timeframes that are being set out, which I'm sure you'll cover in detail now about the consultation period, and each and every member getting the opportunity to vote, will allow most brigades to be able to deliver on that. And we think that's an important point to make. In the past, we've had to do ballots, paper ballots, getting an envelope in the post and putting it back in. That this is an advancement on that. So making sure that every member gets to vote all across the UK on where we take it. And that's an important point. It is an important decision that members will make each and every year, and it will always be in the hands of our members to do that, what we're trying to do. And that there will be other committees that take different positions on this. We have tried to make sure that every bit of information that we've had available to us, every point of negotiations has come back to the Executive Council in detail, where they are, where funding sits, where we think we are, and we've pushed it up until the final point in time, the morning of the National Joint Council meeting. Yeah. And this is where we sit. I don't think there is any more to be gained from negotiations. Okay. You can only take it so far. And now it's in the hands of the members to decide what they want to do. Okay, so this is the most in your assessment, this is in the Executive Council assessment, this is the most that can be achieved through negotiations, through the NJC. So let's talk about how members decide. So there's two phases. The first phase began on the 3rd of June, straight after the NJC, when the offer was received, and that carries on to the 15th of June, and that'll be through the structures of the union. So that'll be through branch meetings, brigade committees, regional committees, etc., where everyone can have the opportunity to discuss and debate it. And that will then be followed by an all-members electronic ballot, as Steve said. And that ballot will open on the 15th of June and close on the 2nd of July. Now, importantly, what that means is you must have an email registered with the Fire Brigade Union. Overwhelmingly, the vast majority of our members have that done. That will then provide a link to an independent scrutineer who's running this ballot. It's not been done internally by the union. It's been done through an independent scrutineers, and the members, as I said, will decide, and that result will come through. Steve, that's quite a tight timetable, but there's a reason behind this, isn't it? And it's to do with giving members the opportunity to get it in their July pay packets, if that's possible. But that might not affect everyone. Is that the case? Yeah, Ben may want to come in on some of this, but we have seen where we've pushed the pay date or an agreement on pay beyond June, July, it does delay some members getting the pay. But that's why we're keen to make sure that we get the information out. And that there's lots of information out there, Tam. We're in the age of AI, aren't we, where information is being circulated, facts and figures. I think what we want to make sure, as directed by the Executive Council, is put the information in members' hands, the real facts and figures.
Yeah, I was actually going to say that. You talk about AI and the internet and social media. There's a lot of strange discussion around this offer and strange facts and figures. But it's important to take the facts and decide on this, isn't it? Yeah.
Well, it's important members fact check as well, isn't it?
Yeah.
There is a lot of, as you say, Tam, strange numbers and information circulating already in relation to this. It's important members listen to what we've got to say and also take stock of the actual correct correspondence that's being issued by the union in and around this. So they've got the real facts available to themselves. I think that's important. In relation to the pay date, that is the 1st of July. This would, if it was accepted, would give opportunity to employers to ensure that the July pay was correct in terms of any new offer and acceptance of that. However, even if it wasn't, it would then soon be able to be corrected because it's not too far into another pay year to ensure that correct backdating of pay was then given a month later.
And that's the driver behind the ballot, the reason why having electronic ballots here to give people, because we're very aware, firefighters have mortgages, they're affected by the cost of living like every other member of society. It's important if we're going to accept this rise that they get it in their pockets,
No, and as Steve has said, economically things have been uncertain for quite some time. So unlike last year, we have pushed this much more closer to the pay date to see how things like inflation had affected the negotiations. The week of the NJC, or last week, we got inflation falling to 2.8. That felt like a reasonable time to look to progress the negotiations to a conclusion, which we did. But therefore, then we were in a space by which was relatively tight to get a turnaround on a full membership consultation and ballot. However, we think we've found a way to do that.
Yeah.
But it does mean that we have had to compress both the consultation and the ballot slightly.
No, there's a lot of work going on here and elsewhere to achieve that.
That's right. There'll be a lot of information coming out, Tam, which will set out the real facts and figures as we see it. I'll just make one point, though. Look, Ben and I, who go into those rooms negotiating over many hours recently, that we worked in the direction of the Executive Council. They've been quite clear on what they expect and where we wanted us to negotiate the pay to. And I think that them making a recommendation to accept or recommend members accept this is quite a big position to take. And quite rightly, the leaders of this union should take that. But I think members need to reflect on that information. And Ben talks about listening to us that are in the room, the recommendations from the executive. Our view to try and get the members paid the money before the summer. I think that is an important point in time. So making sure this consultation, people attend meetings and understand what this really means for them in their pay packets.
Absolutely. Okay, so we have to address the question. The decision is up to members. Mm-hmm. The recommendation is accept it, but the decision is for members. If this offer is rejected, we've got a responsibility to talk about the next steps in. So if the offer is rejected, where do you see this going? A campaign?
I think it would have to, Tam. I think just to be frank and clear with members, though, that a rejection of this would have an impact hugely on the opportunities of pay reform. We would have to, or the Executive Council would have to determine the consultative ballot, some form of indication of members' willingness to take strike action as well. And it would have to amount to us considering that as kind of the only option to address pay for this year. That would mean, to be clear, that members wouldn't receive the award of 3.8 as set out by ourselves here, and it would mean that we would have to immediately announce some form of industrial campaign. Yeah. I don't know how far that would be, up to members how far that went, but I think it's important to point out the risk of a rejection and the impact it would have on the opportunities to increase pay next year or the year after in relation to the pay reform work.
Yeah. Just to make the point, that has been a strategy of this union for some time, Tam. And look, we work to the direction of conference, we work to the direction of the Executive Council, who have made pay reform the number one industrial issue for this union, and that's what we're trying to deliver on. And that won't come quickly necessarily. We're trying to turn around 20 years of where pay has been, the years of austerity, but also the role of a firefighter. These are issues that our members, our executive council expect us to deliver on. And we're going to the detail. I'm certain we'll be able to put something on the table in front of our members in 2027. We've committed to conference to do that. I understand the frustrations that people feel. I felt them. I felt them in the 25-year career I've had of the role that a firefighter does. The pay that you get paid in one brigade is different to another. We want to try and fix that. But what I will say is certainly this year's pay negotiations have not been, and I often hear this saying of we'll get jammed tomorrow because of accepting something less this year. We have pushed the employers, I believe, to 3.8. The furthest we can push them through negotiations as far as we can. So it hasn't been any let up just because we're talking about pay reform. Yes, it sits side by side, and I think there could be a derailment if we take a different direction. I think this is when you asked me the question of what were the Executive Council balancing and what were they debating in discussion. It was that. Is this fair and credible for the here and now? And does it give us the opportunity to quite rightly take forward the issues that our members have been demanding of us for a number of years? And Ben and I were chatting about this earlier. This is constantly what we are trying to talk about, constantly what we're trying to move forward. Was that the previous pay structure took about 5 years to negotiate. But we're trying to do it quicker than that because we understand the urgency around it. And I think we can. I think we can get there with the backing of the union, the backing of our members, and making sure that we're united on this approach.
Yeah. Okay, we've mentioned pay reform a lot. Let's cover that out as much as we can. Ben, I'll turn to you first. When we're talking about pay reform, what's the drivers behind it? What are we trying to achieve for members in the fire service?
I think many things. I think it's the opportunity that allows the union to conclude some of the campaigns or aspirations the union's had for decades. All through the time we've had this pay structure, there's always been arguments about what's in and what's not in the role of a firefighter. This work allows us to get to the bottom of that and be really clear about what firefighters are expected to do in relation to things like the Fire Services Act, but equally then how that transpires into job descriptions for firefighters, and really tighten that up and ensure that if the role does evolve in the future, that the systems are able to take place around that and ensure firefighters then are paid for doing that work. Yeah. I went round with the president in January around all the regions of the union, and we're having discussions about the opportunity of pay reform. And one thing that stuck out probably the most to me is that there were certain payments for skills in one brigade that were paid 0, and in another brigade, I think the biggest difference was 20%.
Really?
So there are services that are paying absolutely nothing for additional skills and experience and development, and in other services they are being paid for that, and some of the disparity is in and around 20% for that. We've had long-term discussions about the pay and control being at 95% of a firefighter's pay, and we keep doing some tabletop exercises on that, and we're not necessarily making the most sound arguments to national employers of why that needs to be that inequality needs to be addressed. This, for example, brings about another opportunity to seriously get to the bottom of that issue and bring about, I hope it would bring about an equalisation of pay there as well. We know there are issues for the retained duty system. Tam, the amount of training hours that they've been given to do ever increasing responsibility. That has to be addressed, and this is the place by which we can do that. So there's 4 or 5 big points to it in relation to that, but I think the fundamental point is this allows us to produce a business case to Treasury with the support of the Fire Minister and the MHCLG department, with the national employers and ourselves, to say, if you want the fire service to look like you are saying you want it to look like, then you have to fund it. And that needs heavy investment. Some of that will go to firefighter pay. Significant amounts should go to firefighters' pay, but equally it would look to increase the professionalisation of the fire service in terms of this all-hazard response that people aspire it to be. And I think that's correct, and I think we all agree that's correct. But a lot has been done for the last 20 years without any further investment. This puts right, if you like, 2 decades of wrongs.
Yeah, and these are big ambitions that are getting driven through them. There's some key injustices that have been identified in the fire and rescue service that the union, and I have to stress this, it's the Fire Brigade's union is seeking to address this. Primarily the very flat pay structure. So I think we're talking about you get additional skills that will assist you in developing and building your pay, so on. I think Ben's covered that there, Steve, but money's so important to this. We are making inroads with the Treasury in this, are we? Or, yeah?
Yeah, just one point on that, in addition to Ben as well, that this flat pay structure, the majority of our members are firefighters, and there are limited opportunities for people to get promotion, but that is ultimately the only way that people can increase their pay. We don't think that's fair. The union's position is we don't think that is acceptable. We want to make sure that there is a structure and a way that firefighters, many that will get qualified pay after 2 years and then sit on the same pay for their, in some cases, 42-year career now. And we want to make sure that people are recompensed and rewarded for their experience, for the skills they've got. And look, we've done a hell of a lot of work, Ben, especially around pay spines in different bodies such as teaching, the NHS, and that we think that is the way forward. It's a way to increase people's pay, but also reward long-serving firefighters for the job that they do. Now, on the funding investment, look, we've had some significant wins recently with different fire services that are trying to push through dangerous cuts. And look, having lost 12,000 firefighters since 2010, dangerous levels, we've all been there, we've all been exposed to heightened risk. We now know that crews in some places turn out with 3 firefighters, routinely 4, and we know that safe crewing is for 5 riders, 5 firefighters on a fire engine. So we're making that case. I think we're doing a good job of that. I think through the Minister Advisory Group, which members will be hopefully fully up to speed on what that means, but making a joint case about what the fire service looks like, what they should be paid, but also around national standards. All this work, I think, is pieced together by this area of reform that we're doing. And look, we are making progress. And I think for the first time that the Fire Brigade Union have got a voice at that table and being listened to. We've seen that recently with the Health and Safety Summit, with the Health Secretary attending and announcing the Health Monitoring Concordat.
Oh, it was incredible, absolutely.
We've seen it with the Fire Minister attending conference this year. So we're making progress. It may seem slow, but I think there's a real opportunity right now to try and fix the years of austerity and get more firefighters on the front line, more firefighters in our control rooms, more officers to be able to deliver what we should be, a Class 1 service to the public.
Okay, I'm going to return to this year's PRM, but just quickly, the pay reform that's due next year, when will members start to see, when's information going to come out in regards to this, something concrete to look at?
I think we're extremely hopeful that come 2027, we're able to present the kind of structure to members and hopefully start the implementation of that structure. Yeah. If you look at other industries, you look at how the NHS pay changed, if you look at how the police force's pay changed, there was an implementation period in some of those sectors fairly extensive, 4, 5, 6 years. We're not suggesting, I don't think, anything that long. But what we do need to do is work out with government at which phase over an implementation period will the funding be given to the fire service. Right. For example, Tam, if we decided we wanted, as a fire service nationally, to take on MTA, actually we would need to ensure that the fire service was funded prior to firefighters beginning that work and equipment arriving, etc., etc. And we'd have to build that into an implementation period. But as I say, hopefully 2027 will bring about members seeing what that final destination could look like and us working about how we would move to an implementation period for it.
Just quickly, Ben, there's a lot of people watch this or listen to this podcast who don't know all the acronyms. We always pick people up. So MTA?
Marauding Terrorist Attack.
Yeah. So if firefighters undertake these duties, the aim is to make sure there's a national standard for it and national pay attached to it as well, yeah?
Yeah, and it probably goes further than that. Those national standards need to be able to develop a national approach to the training, the equipment, etc. that firefighters have when they attend those incidents.
Absolutely.
There are 2 collective agreements, one in London and one in Manchester, for firefighters to do that additional work. They're paid to do that additional work. They're given the right equipment, they're given the right training to do that. There is, if you look at other services that are attempting to do it on a shoestring, quite a hodgepodge kind of attempt to look at that area of work. And most often, firefighters aren't paid correctly for doing that work. We don't want there to be a whole scheme of additional responsibility allowances. What we want to see is firefighters' core pay, pensionable pay increased.
Oh, and that's an important point, isn't it? Making it pensionable pay. That's going to be a big part of the questions that listeners are going to have for it, yeah?
That's what we're talking about when we're talking about pay reform. It will be an entire structural change to pay, similar to what we had 25 years ago and then the 25 years before that. Whatever we get to in 2027, if we are going to seize this opportunity, needs to be able to see the test of the next 25 years as well. So it is quite a generational shift in terms of firefighter pay.
No, it's going to be a massive thing, and information coming out primarily in 2027 when it hopefully comes in. But in the meantime, keep in touch with your officials.
Well, I think hopefully people are up to speed on some of this work because, as Ben said, there's been a tour of every region. We hope that information is getting passed out through the branch structure. But there will be a circular coming out hopefully this week. A policy was passed at conference just in May about what the direction of travel is, committing to the 2027, committing to making sure that we're transparent, open in where we are. So that there will be information coming out from head office. But look, the best place to get information is attending your branch meetings, brigade committee meetings, discuss it, debate it, and get the updates from the officials that have got the direct link into the Executive Council.
Okay, thanks for that. Right, back to this year. So there's a pay offer on the table of 3.8% pay increase to all grey book roles and continuous professional development. It's your say. The Executive Council recommends you accept it, but you'll be getting a ballot electronically. So make sure, first of all, you've given the union your email address. It has to be a personal email address. We can't use fire service emails for two obvious reasons. One, big firewalls. Two, not everyone might be aware, but your bosses can read your fire service email. So personal email addresses only, please. Overwhelming majority of members have done so. If you haven't, get in touch with your organisers. The email will arrive between the 15th of June. It will then close on the 2nd of July, and you will have your say on the ballot. Any questions in between that, contact your local brigade officials. Hopefully that's a lot of information going out. Further updates will follow. In the meantime, thanks very much to Assistant General Secretary Ben Selby and General Secretary Steve Wright.
Cheers, Tam.